For those of us drawn to the far side of the Dungeon Master's screen, it's important to remember that it's not all mysterious dice rolls. Taking players outside for secret chats. You'd best bring your character sheet. And trying to perfect your maniacal laugh. Being a good Dungeon Master takes time and practice, and everyone will develop their own style. In fact, that's part of what makes it fun to play with different Dungeon Masters. But I've learnt a few things over the years, mainly by getting them wrong, that I'd like to pass on to you. So if you're a budding Dungeon Master, pay attention. The first and most important thing to remember is that it's not you versus the players. If that was the case, you would always win. Any role-playing game is a social contract, and in that contract, everyone agrees to play fair. For the players, that's not cheating with their dice rolls or staring at their phone while you're trying to create an eerie atmosphere. As the Dungeon Master, you also have to play fair. If the characters happen to slay all the monsters with ruthless efficiency, disarm the traps, persuade the NPCs to let them go where you never thought they would be allowed, sometimes you just have to pat them on the back. You shouldn't take it personally and get annoyed with them.
Yes, I've done it! I've defeated all the monsters!
There's a strange glow and they all stand up again.
What? But that's not fair, I just defeated them!
We'll see about that. As you become more experienced as a Dungeon Master, there might well be times where you can subtly adjust the adventure because you feel the players are having too easy a time of it without making it seem like you're punishing them. If the players pick up on that, they'll very quickly feel disheartened. Remember, if the players are having fun and you're having fun, everyone is winning. That's the goal of a role-playing game, for you all to win, not for the Dungeon Master to win. The next thing to remember is to avoid railroading the characters. You don't want the adventure to be on tracks, forcing the players to make a certain set of decisions. The beauty of a role-playing game is that things are so open. It is a sandbox. They can deal with the problems in any way they choose. Now, of course, as a new Dungeon Master, that can be quite daunting, which is why a dungeon of some kind, and by dungeon it doesn't have to be a literal dungeon, it could be a building perhaps in a futuristic setting. Anywhere where there's confines and the players have a limited set of decisions is much easier when you're getting started. As you become more confident, you can expand your world and give the players true freedom. Now, the most successful adventures I think I've run have been where I've had certain plot points, but between those plot points, players have had complete freedom to decide how to get from A to B. Again, experience helps with this. But one thing I would say is that sometimes when an adventure goes completely off the rails is when you can have the most fun. I've played adventures which were quite chaotic. Within half an hour of the session starting, the PCs had messed things up completely. They were being chased across the city by all the police force and things weren't going at all how I'd planned. But if you go with that, if you remember that you're just trying to have fun with each other, then things generally turn out okay. So don't try to railroad your adventurers too much. They won't like it. My next piece of advice is to ensure that the Dungeon Master and the players are operating in the same genre. Now, a game like Dungeons and Dragons, for example, tends towards high fantasy, but has plenty of different settings. And even within those settings, you can have adventures which are lighter or darker. You need to make sure that the players understand the genre that this particular adventure is in. Now, if you have experienced players, you could use motifs to introduce the tone that you want. So the players arrive in a village and there's a grisly gallows complete with hungry crows and freshly dug graves in a graveyard. That would be enough for experienced players to think, oh, this is a little bit darker. But if you have new players, don't be afraid to say to them, this is going to be a more light-hearted adventure, or this one is going to be perhaps very high fantasy with lots of magic. That way, players are going to avoid taking the wrong sorts of actions, which can just cause confusion for everybody. You enter the vast library, and in the distance you can hear the chanting of cultists. Somewhere in here are the clues you need to work out the ritual. What are you going to do?
I'll raise me Tommy gun, spray the ceiling with bullets, and shout at the top of me voice, "Who wants some?"
Oh, right. My next piece of advice is to ham it up. Do everything you can to bring the NPCs to life, because it will just make the setting so much more interesting. Now, try not to worry about whether or not you're a performer or an actor. A lot of new Dungeon Masters are very nervous about this. I promise you, I've never seen a player complain that a Dungeon Master's accent wasn't quite right, or that the voice they were doing was silly and they should stop. Players like it. It gives them something that they can use as kindling, and their imaginations will spark, and suddenly what they're seeing is far more engaging. So you could try a few accents.
The gold in these mines belongs to me. If you want it, you're gonna have to fight me.
Or just silly voices.
The Dark Lord rises before you.
Now you will kneel, or you will die.
You could give the characters some sort of unusual tick.
Poison? In this city? Guards are pretty careful about that kind of thing. It's going to cost you a lot of money, that's for sure.
Or perhaps simply a catchphrase, something that sounds like them.
The smuggler glances at the navicomp and shakes his head. I've got a bad feeling about this, and his furry companion seems to agree.
So, I would just advise you to go for it. Ham it up. Whenever I do this kind of thing, there is no subtlety to it at all, but it will help the players to immerse themselves in your games. My final advice is to always trust your players when they tell you something. I've had gaming sessions where I'm about to move the action on, and suddenly a player will say to me, wait, I told you that I was hiding as soon as I went into the room. Now, a role-playing table can be quite a lively place. You can have more than one person talking at a time. And sometimes, as the Dungeon Master, you will miss things. So if a player points something out and claims that they would have done something slightly differently, you didn't hear them, trust them. If you don't, you're essentially saying to that player, I don't believe you, I think you're a liar. How can you possibly have an enjoyable gaming session if you make an accusation like that? So my advice is to always trust the player. Similarly, if they haven't written something down on their character sheet, but you know that a few sessions ago they found such and such a potion, I wouldn't be a job's worth. Role-playing games are not bookkeeping activities. Again, trust your players. I think if you do that, you create a much more welcoming and friendly atmosphere around the table. And as I mentioned right at the start, this is all about having fun. So, those are my 5 pieces of advice for budding Dungeon Masters. And if you are thinking about getting on the other side of the screen, absolutely go for it. I love role-playing games, and I particularly enjoy running them. It's a wonderful experience. You get to invent these incredible stories, play these characters in a very cheesy and hammy way, as I mentioned, but it's absolutely something that I would recommend trying. So, have a go. Now, I hope this has been useful for you, and I'll see you again soon. Until then, keep rolling.